All right, let's just dive right in. We're about to take a trip back in time, way back. But this isn't your typical historical tour. We're going to a world so fundamentally different from ours that the very air you breathed, the water you drank, it would all be a threat. We're heading to the year 1348, and I'm going to show you exactly why you, and me for that matter, wouldn't have made it out alive. So let's kick things off with a true story. There was a man named Richard the Raker. His job, as you might guess, was to clean out cesspools. Well, one day, he drowned. In his own. He fell right through the floor. But here's the most insane part. Nobody batted an eye. It wasn't seen as some freak accident. It was just another Tuesday. The only thing separating civilization from a literal pit of sewage was a few rotten planks of wood. And that right there is the heart of what we're talking about. For most people, life wasn't about epic castle sieges or noble quests. No, it was a daily, grinding struggle with filth. And your 21st century immune system, your modern ideas of cleanliness, your basic expectation of not drowning in human waste, all totally useless. You would not have survived. To really understand why, we first have to get a feel for the environment itself. So let's take a walk through the streets of a medieval city. A world of just overwhelming, inescapable filth. First off, just imagine the sheer density. You've got 80,000 people jammed into 1 square mile. That's kind of like modern-day Manhattan, but with zero plumbing. Not a single sewer pipe. Instead, you had the Fleet River, which was, get this, both the city's main sewer and its main water source. Butchers would just chuck animal guts into it. Tanneries dumped their chemical waste. And oh yeah, wild pigs, we're talking closer to boars with tusks, just roamed the streets, sometimes even attacking people. And yes, that last point is real. A stream that people actually used for directions was officially named on maps Shitbrook. So what about your home? Well, if you're wealthy, you might have a garderobe. Sounds fancy, right? It was basically a stone chute that just dropped waste directly into the moat below. But here's the kicker. The name literally means wardrobe because people would hang their clothes in these toilet chambers on purpose. They actually believed the ammonia fumes from the human waste would kill fleas and lice. Your best clothes hanging over a pit of sewage, by design. For everybody else, you just had a chamber pot, and every morning you had to empty it. Where to? The street, of course. The only real piece of sanitation law was a rule that you had to shout, "Look out below," 3 times before you chucked it out the window. That was it. They weren't trying to stop the problem, just manage the splash zone. Okay, so it's really easy to picture them all as these universally filthy savages. But this is where the story gets way more complicated, and honestly, a lot more tragic. It's time to tackle what I call the great hygiene myth. Here's the first thing you have to understand. They did care about being clean. This whole popular image we have of people going years without washing, it's mostly wrong. Washing your hands and face every day was totally standard. Etiquette manuals were a thing, and they told people to keep their fingernails clean. And get this, public bathhouses were everywhere. In the 13th century, Paris had 32 of them. Vienna had 29. People would go there to socialize, eat, and just hang out in these huge wooden tubs. In fact, they thought about it a lot. One physician from the 14th century actually cataloged 57 different, distinct ways a person could take a bath. 57! This wasn't some forgotten art. It was a pretty sophisticated part of their culture. But let's be really clear here. While medieval Europeans were definitely trying, we were centuries behind other parts of the world. I mean, back in the 10th century, when London was just this little town of about 10,000 people, a city like Islamic Cordoba had over 500,000 people, streetlights, running water, and 300 public baths. For them, cleanliness was considered half of faith. And this right here brings us to the central puzzle of this whole story. If there were washing, if they had all these bathhouses, if they really did care about being clean, why was their world still such a death trap of filth and disease? What was the piece they were missing? The answer, the real villain of this story, wasn't a lack of trying. It was a complete, catastrophic misunderstanding of what actually causes sickness. The problem was their medicine. You see, their entire idea of health was built on 3 totally wrong frameworks. First was humoral theory, the belief that your body was full of 4 fluids and being sick just meant they were out of balance. Second was miasma theory, the idea that diseases were caused by bad air or nasty smells coming from rotting stuff. And third, the simplest and maybe most devastating one, disease was a punishment from God. And if you want to know just how lost they were, check this out. In 1348, the most respected medical institution in all of Europe, the University of Paris, was asked to figure out what was causing the plague. Their official conclusion? It was a planetary alignment that corrupted the atmosphere. Not germs, not bacteria, the position of Jupiter and Mars. That was the absolute best science they had. And the cures that came from this thinking were just as misguided. To rebalance your humors, they would bleed you. They'd burn open the plague sores, the buboes, with a hot poker. One really popular cure, called the Vickery method, literally involved strapping a live chicken's bare butt against the swelling to supposedly draw out the poison. Spoiler alert, nothing worked.
So, it was into this world, a world that smelled like an open sewer and was armed with medical theories about planets and chickens, that the greatest catastrophe in human history showed up.
It started in Central Asia and just spread like wildfire along the trade routes. In October 1347, it showed up in Sicily on some merchant ships. By the next summer, it had crossed into England. And by November of 1348, it was in London. It moved faster than information, just a silent, invisible wave of death. The sheer scale of the devastation is, well, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. In the city of Florence, just between March and July of 1348, it's estimated that up to 80% of the entire population died. 4 out of every 5 people. Gone. In just a few months. The data is shocking, but the human cost is where the real horror is. A writer from Siena at the time wrote this. I, Angelo di Torra, buried my 5 children with my own hands, for no one wept for any death because all awaited death. Society just completely fell apart. Parents abandoned their kids. Brothers abandoned brothers. In total, across Europe, the Black Death killed an estimated 50 million people. That was somewhere around 60% of the entire population of the continent, wiped out in less than a decade. It was truly an apocalypse. But for the people who somehow survived, the world they came back to was unrecognizable. And here we find the final and maybe the darkest irony of this entire story. Remember their bad medical theories? Well, the terror of the plague pretty much cemented them as fact. The belief in bad air, miasma, led to a new and terrible fear, that bathing in warm water opened up the pores of your skin, and that's how the plague got in. So the one big thing they were actually doing right, bathing, they abandoned it. Public bathhouses all across Europe closed down, and people became measurably less clean after the plague than they had been before. And yet, out of this unimaginable horror, a new world was born. With so many workers gone, labor suddenly became valuable. The entire system of serfdom began to collapse. Cities like Venice came up with the idea of quarantine, and the very first public health measures were created. It was a brutal, horrifying, but incredibly effective lesson for humanity. You know, when you look back, you realize they weren't stupid or lazy. They were just trapped by the limits of what they knew. Their greatest enemy was microscopic, an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't name, and couldn't possibly comprehend. Which leaves us with a pretty heavy question, doesn't it? What's the invisible threat? The flawed assumption, the bad air that we're all believing in right now?